Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode at a time. And today, on the 16th of January 2017, we are starting the second of the Patrick Troughton audios that I will be covering in this marathon, which is The Rosemariners, with episode 1, written by script editor Donald Tosh, who was a script editor during the Hartnell era of the show, and that's something that really shows, if you pardon the pun, mainly a lot of the fact that this episode really doesn't have the Doctor getting involved until the very end. You have this is a lot of setup for good ideas. We basically getting the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe into place for the story, getting the villains, which are the titular Rosemariners, who are creatures that have this rose garden, and they have this, I don't know if you could call it a drug, called Rose Dream, that I guess makes you be taken over by a Rosemariner. It's an interesting concept, to say the least. This is an episode that really introduces the concepts, and building those concepts are really, really good. That is what I really enjoy about this story, is that it is one that it's one of those things that really just sort of does. It's the concept that really gets things going and keeps things interesting in terms of story. This one mainly being that you have Jamie and Zoe sort of on their own, while the Doctor is, sort of geeking out with this scientist guy who the Rosemariners want, and it's just sort of one of those, the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe sort of stumble into things, which is really a really good way to start this. Like, you have that sort of makes sense it's something that the Doctor very much would do, is that he would just sort of stumble in where things would things generally would be anything. You just sort of have this sort of, I'm stumbling around, I'm being with a bumbling professor, and it's good. It knows how to handle itself as a story. It gives just the real feeling that this is sort of where the story's going. It's a good episode. The rest of the story is probably going to need to pick up the pace a little bit, and just get us into something, because this sort of is just all set up. I feel like this might just be a 3-act structure, and this episode's just sort of there to have an introduction to the structure. When that's not necessarily the best way of doing this sort of thing. You probably need to have a structured story from this outset, and not just sort of having us there. So I'll give The Rosemariners episode 1 an 8 out of 10, because it's also really cool that Donald Tosh adapted this himself for audio, and he has a decent grasp on how to do it. There are just some points where it's like, it just doesn't feel quite right. But yeah, this one will get an 8 out of 10. Right, it is the 17th of January 2017, and I just finished watching The Rosemariners listening to The Rosemariners episode 2. And this episode actually gets the story going. The weird thing is that it almost feels like this story so far is sort of a movie script for if it was a Doctor Who movie, mainly due to the fact that it just sort of we're going from event to event, and cliffhangers. We don't really have the typical cliffhanger formula of rise, cliffhanger, resolution, story resolution. And then, you have just you have another rise, and then cliffhanger, resolution, rise, cliffhanger, revolution, rise, climax, ending. It's not a Um, it's not an actual sort of ending. It just sort of um, it just sort of there's no sort of ending to the story, to the episodes. It's just sort of a let's end it. Like episode 2 ends with a much more cliffhanger with Jamie being eaten up by the roses. What's interesting is that this one, because it's being told sort of through the eyes of our protagonists, the antagonists are who, and a lot of this is sort of using, the story uses deception a lot, and I like that in particular. I like when stories use sort of like, well, I'm just deceiving you, and I'm just sort of deceiving the audience into thinking that I'm a hero. And the Rosemariners do have a sympathetic plight. The idea is, this one's actually a very continuity heavy. There's a continuity all the way back to the Daleks' master plan, which that feels like it's been a while since we had the Daleks' master plan, where basically the Rosemariners, Ragosa has what's happened is Ragosa and his people have been had this rose dream, which is sort of a drug that comes from a plant on Kemble, and this plant on Kemble has in fact sort of made the Rosemariners sort of have this inability. It kills them. It puts them into this crazy sleep, which, he's not lying at all. Like, this rose dream does put people into a sleep, but it's actual, like, you actually have humans that have been captured. And, Clive Wood plays the Rosemariner, as a very threatening, as a threatening figure, but it's more, you have him trying to get the doctor and this scientist Biggs to basically to help his people out, and it's a very smart plan, and it works if it weren't for the fact that Jamie and Zoe are there, and they uncover sort of that the Rosemariners know there's something more strange going on, and it's one of those things that this is one of those things that probably wouldn't have been made on television just because of how big of a budget it is. A lot of the problems come in the fact that the pacing is off really quite a bit. It's in this weird sort of we take this weird pace and try to have that as the story. So you have that's just it's odd. It's a very, very odd pace, and I don't think it helps the story at all. Like you really could feel that this story could be paced a lot better. You could have things tightened up, and some things tightened up, some things drawn out. But just sort of, it depends on, how they're going to do it, how you're going for this. So, and it's good. The episode is good. Like, all the backstory is good. I like the Rosemariners as a concept. But I mean, we're already 2 episodes into this, and it feels like we're already hitting that big climax. So I don't know how it's going to sustain the last 2 episodes. So I'm going to give the Rosemariners episode 2 another 8 out of 10, because we could be in for something good. We could also be in for something a little on something that I'd be on the fence about. All right, it is the 18th of January, 2018, and I just finished listening to the Rosemariners episode 3, and this episode is one that, while I don't want to say that it is a perfect episode, because it's not perfect, it's still a little slow in places. It's a 31-minute runtime, but as an episode, it is really a solid story. obviously this, I don't know, this is one of those ones that I don't know why it couldn't have easily been made. Like, this is minimal sets. I mean, maybe the effects would have been difficult with Rose Dream and just the roses. But for the most part, it reads as a story that could have very, very easily been, it could have very easily been made onto television. There isn't too much, outside of a lot of references to the Daleks and past stories, which is something that Donald Tosh really suffers on. There isn't too much that couldn't have been created for television. Episode 3 is one of those episodes that it improves on the previous 2 episodes, while also keeping the story, as a story. Like, it's keeps itself going, has the idea that, sort of, it's one of those things that, you think the idea is, the idea is that it couldn't have been, that it couldn't have been made on television. But this one, it easily could have. It doesn't have too many crazy sets. Nothing too crazy that would stop it from being made. It was originally meant to be made in season 6 of the show, and that's sort of where it gets played. That being said, you have the episode itself still keeps the feeling that this is a movie and not a TV serial. Like, the cliffhanger is Rugosa has the upper hand, as this episode is sort of, it's got a bit of padding of just sort of the Doctor and Biggs thinking we have the upper hand, Rugosa thinking they have the upper hand, and by the end of it, no one really has the upper hand at all. Like, it's, but by the end of it, everyone is sort of, everything's just sort of jolting from one person to the next, and the big ending, the big like build up to is that, again, that just Rugosa has the upper hand. There are a lot of big twists added in this episode, mainly the fact that mainly one of the big facts that the Rosemariners who's been working with the Doctor isn't an evil one. He's just the warden of a prison, and Rugosa and, of course, Colbert they're the ones who are actually the villains, which we've kind of knew the whole time. Like, it's one of those things that you think, oh, we had a great build up, but we didn't really have any way of deciding to end things. Like, we had an ending in mind, but we just couldn't do too much with it, so we left it as it is. And the the big ending of this story is really, it's really Zoe's story. Like, Wendy Padbury does an excellent job, as she gets to be some pretty funny moments. But other than that, the episode is a great episode. Really, there's nothing else I can say that it's great. The Rosemariners episode 3 gets a 9 out of 10, and I'll be back for the final episode tomorrow. It's the 19th of January 2018, and I just finished listening to episode 4 of the Rosemariners. I gotta remember that these are audio episodes and not visual ones. And what can I say? This one keeps up the streak of the last couple episodes and concludes the story in a really good fashion. What's nice is that this episode doesn't end with a bang, rather it ends with a clever way of ending the story, of trying to be clever and giving us a conclusion to the plot that way, without trying to be action, drama, adventure. And I really enjoyed that. It was a good way to end the story, a good way to make everything feel like it was wrapped up. It was nice that, our villain mainly wasn't a race of evil aliens. It was just one guy, part of a society. This is one of those stories that you could probably easily take out the Rosemariners and make the villains humans, and not as much would change. A lot of the idea is he wants to take over the universe. So, cheesy 60s plot, really good way to end it. Really good for David Warner. He's always an enjoyable actor, and when he shows up in these audio dramas, it's always a good time. He plays Biggs as a very realistic character, very much a foil for the Doctor, played by, of course, Fraser Hines, doing an impeccable Patrick Troughton impression. And, just the episode itself ends as a story really well. It knows how to be a story and end everything, without any problem. So I'm going to give The Rosemariners episode 4 a 9 out of 10. And that, of course, brings us to the end of the story. So we give The Rosemariners a total of 8.5 out of 10. Thank you for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon, and please join me next time when we look at the third in our little mini trilogy of Patrick Troughton audios. There will be 4 audios total, but the third one with the Queen of Time.